This is Getting Seen, Chapter 5. Before you begin writing, you're not quite ready yet to start putting together your resume. You're close, but at this point, you've basically done some research. You've got some things prepared. But before we sit down and start, putting paper to pen or typing on the keyboard, there's some things we want to consider with the way the resume looks and the information that we're going to relay. By this time, you know that you're a teacher. You're not a marketer, and I know I've said that a lot of numerous times, but I want to just hit that home. Make a very good point. Your mentality, the way you approach this, is very critical. Your resume should not be an autobiography. You're not going to include things that are not pertinent or relevant to the job. And you've also promised yourself in this training that you're not going to lie or exaggerate things or mislead anyone. So you've done your resume reconnaissance at this point. We've talked about everything that is involved with that. You've only got a few seconds to make an impact initially on someone, and that someone very likely has unique biases and a mentality that they're approaching when they pick up your resume. So considering that we've got all that information together, does that mean that you're ready to start writing? No, not just yet. We're going to talk about in this video the science of reading. This is purely from a technical standpoint. We're also going to deal with maximum impact. I'm going to show you what to weed out of your resume and what key features to leave in so that every single punch that you're throwing will give you maximum impact. I've got 11 points to perfection. These are topics almost like a checklist that it'll make it easier for you to put your resume together and just make sure that you hit each one of those points. And if you do, your resume is going to be, honestly, as good as it possibly can be. And then we'll just go over a quick review. So the science of reading. We're going to be looking at reading from a purely technical standpoint for just a moment here. Reading is accomplished using a succession of eye movements known as fixations. These movements allow the reader to interpret any given line of text in 3 or 4 movements. So what we have in just the paragraph right here, as you try to read that, you'll notice that your eye, it's not going R-E-A-D-I-N-G, reading is accomplished. It doesn't follow the cursor here. Okay, it jerks from point to point, and your eye pretty much fixates on that given point, and then you interpret what your eye sees. And each one of those fixations lasts about 1/4 of a second. With easy reading material, you might read 3 or 4 words per fixation. So your eye jumps to one position. You might read several words, adjacent to that, and then you jump to a new position, and that's how we read. With easy reading material, we can do, 3 or 4 words per fixation. With more difficult reading, we might only do 1 word per fixation. And remember that each fixation lasts about 1/4 of a second. So what that means is that most adults can read between 200 and 1,000 words per minute, depending mostly on the difficulty of the material. So if the words, if the language that is used, if the layout or arrangement of the text is easy, then we can get in more information. We can get, maybe 1,000 words in a minute. If it's more difficult, if the structure is complicated, then that lowers it down to 200. What does that mean for us? Well, it means that if we applied that to the 10-second scan rule, then a recruiter will be able to understand between 20 and 100 words before they basically make that decision, am I going to keep reading or am I going to move on to the next resume? The harder it is to read your resume, the fewer the words that they're going to be able to squeeze in. Reading takes concentration. The longer your sentences are, the bigger the words, the more complicated the structure that you use, the fewer the words that they'll be able to see. And notice that I didn't say that it'll take them longer to read. That's because it won't. You're not going to get any more time than that 10-second scan. So if your resume is more complicated, if it's more difficult to read, You just limited yourself to how many words you can relate to them and how much they'll be able to comprehend. So the question that we have to ask here is, what do you want to do with those 10 seconds? Do you want to give them 20 words about yourself, or do you want to give them 100? I think you know the answer here. We want to give them maximum impact. If you want to give your resume maximum impact and make a lasting impression, consider these points. Short words equal high comprehension. Long words equal low comprehension. Common font. This means just a standard font like the one that you're seeing on the screen right now. That equals high comprehension. An unusual font equals low comprehension. Short blocks of text equal high comprehension. Long blocks of text equal low comprehension. One of the main reasons for that is if people see a large block of text, honestly, they will ignore it. They will say, this is too much work for me, and they'll skip on to something that looks a little bit easier. Same thing applies for bullets. Simple, bulleted format, high comprehension. A complex and unusual format equals low comprehension. Are you seeing that there's a pattern here? And this is really what you see before you right now is a simple formula for maximum comprehension. Is the goal of your resume to make reading difficult, or is it to teach them what you can do for them in the least amount of time possible? It's to teach them as quickly as possible because we've only got, 10, 15 seconds to make our point, to make our impact. So as you're getting ready to write that resume, all of these things need to be taken into account. Short words are going to be high comprehension. Common font, short blocks of text, a simple bulleted format. If you stay away from these other items here, a complex and unusual format, longer blocks of text, all these, then you greatly increase the amount of comprehension that you relay to them through your resume. Remember, the goal of the recruiter is to actually toss out as many resumes as possible and build a small pile of prospects, people that they want to actually, have for an interview. The harder your resume is to read, the more work that they have to do and the less information you can relate in those 10 seconds. And the more likely that they're going to toss your resume. When a recruiter picks up your resume, just based entirely on what it looks like, they're going to develop preconceived notions on what the resume is actually going to contain, what kind of content is going to be there. If you start out strong, if the first thing that they read is very strong and clear, they're going to expect that the whole resume is going to be like that. If you start out very weak, they're going to assume that, it's going to be weak throughout. And we can use this to our advantage because the way that people interpret things has a lot to do with those preconceived notions. So if, for example, they look at your resume and it gives them a preconceived notion that it's going to be a strong resume, then that helps you as they read it. They've already got that mentality, and you would actually have to severely disappoint them to change their mind frame. If they pick up your resume and by its appearance it looks weak, then you're going to have to do something very strong to change that mentality. So we can use this to our advantage. Let's go ahead and talk about the 11 points to perfection. Each one of these items is essentially something that you can put on a checklist. Write it down and get it in your mind when you initially create the resume. And then when you go through the edit and review process, make sure that you can check off each one of these points. First one, start very, very strong. Throw the first punch with the top third of the first page of your resume. Remember that. Okay, the top third, get their attention and hold their interest. You want to create a desire in them to keep reading. So give them a strong and compelling reason to continue. If you are out shopping for a house, curb appeal is very important. If the house doesn't look good from the road, then you're just going to keep driving. You're not going to say, well, maybe it's nicer inside. Who cares? Because it doesn't look good outside. The same holds true for your resume. If that first initial glance does not seem attractive and appealing. They're not going to dig to find out if there's more information that is going to change, their view. Things like career objectives. Honestly, that's usually very self-serving. And for that reason, career objectives don't usually get a lot of attention. You want to capture interest, create desire. If your career objective simply paraphrases the job description, or maybe it's very general and vague, it's not going to leave a good impression. In fact, it's wasting space and taking up people's time. You're actually losing real estate, valuable real estate, I might add, with just fluff. The top third of the first page is your absolute most valuable area. You don't want anything weak there. Everything must be strong. Instead of a career objective statement, use highly relevant keywords and an executive summary of your past accomplishments. That's what the recruiter is really looking for. When you show them right up front that you've been a performer in the past, they'll be much more susceptible to believing that you're going to be a performer in the future. And if you can't show them those traits in the beginning, you're probably not going to get an opportunity to show them later on. Shoot for a specific target. List accomplishments that showcase how you were able to help other companies with similar problems. Don't waste everybody's time with generic comments, things like the benefits of loyal and skilled employees. They don't care. They've seen all of that. They know all of that. You got to show them something that they don't know. How are you going to help them? If you have to, refer back to Chapter 1, where we talked about a list of the things that motivate hiring managers. Those are the things you want to focus on. How can you help them financially? Can you save them time, money? Can you maybe solve or prevent problems that they've got? Use a writing style that relates to them, that you understand their position, and that you know what they're going through. List accomplishments that showcase how you were able to help other companies with similar problems, and you want to be very specific. Laser target a specific job opening. This is not where you put comments like, you're a great company and I just want to work there. And one note on this, some people will try to appeal to a broad range of job openings. If you do that, you're not ever really going to be able to connect specifically with any of them. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you're trying to save on resume writing services. But if you give them that generic one-size-fits-all resume and it shows up with 250 highly targeted resumes specific to that job, which one do you think is going to get noticed? Right, not yours. Take the time to laser target an individual resume for that specific job opening. Avoid fancy extras. Don't get fancy with the layout. Using clip art, multiple typefaces, double spacing, all that kind of stuff, that causes problems with scanning software. It's distracting to the eye. Clever layouts just make it hard to read, so don't fool with any of that kind of stuff. Number 4, don't include out-of-date information. We want relative and current content only. Maybe you worked on a job 15 years ago, and it's really significant to you. More than likely, you don't want to put it on your resume. If it's something that you did 15 years ago, especially if it's not related, just leave it out. And the reason is, today, hiring managers want to know what's current, what's happening now. They want cutting edge. Certifications that you've got back, from 1979, it might be very important to you. And I understand, you went through a lot and you learned a lot and maybe it was a great accomplishment for you. But more than likely it's not relevant to that hiring manager today, because chances are times have changed and, people might not even do things that way. However you learned back in 1979, they might not do it that way anymore. So with stuff like that, usually you don't want to go back more than 10 years. Again, people want cutting edge. And I guess an easy way to demonstrate that is if they're looking for someone with skills in Microsoft Office, 2007, and you put on there that you've got extensive training on a typewriter, okay, I think you see my point. it's best to just leave the whole typewriter thing out of the resume and put in something that's a little more current. Now, if it's something like, you won a Nobel Peace Prize back in 1970, sure, you can list that, something that's, a phenomenal accomplishment. But hopefully along with that, you're able to provide them something that's a little more up to date to show them that, you're still a phenomenal chemist or, whatever. Number 5 is list first things first. Most hiring managers aren't actually going to read your resume, and I know that hurts. Every time that I say that, I feel the pain. They're not going to read it. They're going to scan the resume for, again, 10 to 15 seconds. Most are never going to reach the bottom of a paragraph. They'll start reading the paragraph, and then they'll just skip to the next one. So when you write, you want to make precautions here to put the most impactful statement as the first line of the paragraph. Consider this, and I'm just going to speak this paragraph to you because I think it makes a really good impact. I want you to look for the impactful, maximum impact statement. Okay, listen for it, I should say. As a project manager for a commercial software project, I subcontracted a major portion of an application to offshore developers, effectively saving the company $4 million. Now, in case you didn't catch it, the bottom line to that whole statement was that I saved the company $4 million. That was the last thing that I said. There's a good chance as they're going through there, as a project manager for a commercial, blah, 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 they get kind of bored with it and they skip on to the next thing. So they totally miss your point. So listen to this version and you'll hear that it's got more impact because their attention, while you've got, their initial attention, you hit them, bam, right up front. Saved a software company $4 million by subcontracting a major project to offshore developers. That makes more impact. You ensure that the statement you want to get across to them is going to be understood. So right away they see the main point. Notice how the second example doesn't focus on your job title. It focuses on what you did. In the first example, I relate, I was a project manager for a commercial software company and all of that kind of stuff. But in the second one, I just state, here's my accomplishment. They don't care about your title. They don't care about your position or, any of that kind of stuff. They care about what did you do. And that's actually a great segue into number 6. Don't forget the nouns. An ideal candidate has experience. They've got skills and accomplishments. The candidates that actually get hired are usually the ones that can convince the recruiter that their particular skill set, their experience, matches up with the job. That's why it's so critically important. Do your reconnaissance work. You need to know, what's going on with the company. What problems are they facing? Teach them that your skills and your accomplishments are relevant to their problems. And it's important that you do that in a language that they understand. If you're traveling to another country, let's say you're going to France, you're going to bring probably a pocket translator with you that has like a, maybe either an electronic one or a little one of those English-French dictionaries, something like that, so that you can look up an English word, find out what the French equivalent is, and be able to convey a message to somebody, right? If you ask for directions and you say the wrong word, you might end up at the bank instead of the restroom, and that could cause you some major problems. Well, it's just as important that you do that, speak the language that the company speaks. It doesn't matter how much experience you've got as a seminar organizer if they're looking for a workshop educator. Yeah, maybe it's the same thing. Your resume is not going to relate that to them unless you use the nouns that they use. How do you know what nouns to use? Well, from your resume reconnaissance work. Check out the website. Talk to people on the phone. Note the terminology that they use. You have to do the translation for them because they're not going to take the time to do it for you. If they call it a workshop educator, then you call it a workshop educator. Next, we've got the review and edit process. Imagine getting everything right, all your ducks in a row, but you throw it all away because you spelled something wrong or you have a grammatical error. Get all your elements together, check off every single item that we've talked about, make it visually appealing, and make it free of mistakes. Once you get it all done, hand it to somebody else. Give it to a friend, family member, whoever, and have them edit it and proofread it. You'll probably be surprised what they come up with. I know of hiring managers that specifically instruct their assistants to scan resumes and eliminate any that have a spelling error. So it's that important. We all make mistakes. We're human. But don't make any mistakes on your resume. The next topic is what type of resume you're going to choose. And really, there are three basic types. You've got reverse chronological, functional, and the combination. Reverse chronological is probably the one that you're mostly familiar with because this is the most popular. You put simply your most recent job first, and you go backwards from there. It's the easiest kind to do, and again, it's the most popular. Then we have the functional resume. The functional resume focuses on what you have done and how you did it, not so much when and where you did it. It focuses on the skills, the accomplishments over a course of, maybe several relevant jobs that you've had in the past. Then we have the combination resume. That's pretty much a functional resume, but after the functional part, it follows up with a reverse chronological list that details a little bit more specifically what those accomplishments were, and again, focus is on the skill set. So which is the best one? Well, the functional resume can be used to conceal, maybe a not so good work history because it focuses on the skills, the accomplishments. And recruiters know that. So if they view they're going to pick up a resume and they're going to notice right away that it's a functional resume, and they'll automatically have a healthy share of contempt because they're kind of asking themselves, okay, what's he trying to hide? So unless you're applying for a position that, normally has a high turnover rate, something like sales or telemarketing, you want to stay away from a functional resume. And for that matter, a combination as well, because it's a lot like a functional resume. The reverse chronological format is the preferred resume type because it demonstrates that the candidate has a steady and upward career growth. It focuses on time, job continuity, growth, achievements, all of those things. And this is what recruiters are looking for. These are traits that they're looking for. One of the fears people have with the reverse chronological format is gaps, periods where, you didn't work. That will throw up a red flag to an employer. If you've got periods like that, you should think of something that you did that was productive during that gap and include an explanation of that in the resume. Remember, most recruiters are going to be skeptical of a functional resume. Even if they don't see any red flags, they're going to wonder what possibly they missed. So as they read through it, they're looking for red flags, and even if they don't catch any, they're going to say, okay, what did I miss, or what did he not include? They're going to be very skeptical, and you don't want that stacked up against you. So reverse chronological, almost always the way to go with that. How many pages? 1 or 2? This is one of the topics that always comes up when we talk about resumes. It's a little bit of a battle, too. There are people that fight for 1 and some fight for 2. Does anybody really know the answer? I seriously doubt it, because there haven't really been studies, at least nothing that I'm aware of, that clearly show either way you stand a better chance. But a 2-page resume does have some advantages in certain situations. If you're applying for a senior position, recruiters generally prefer a 2-page resume for obvious reasons. By having more content there, that implies that you've got more experience. It allows you to add more details, on the second page about civic activities that you've been involved in, leadership experience. You can free up some of the space on the first page so that it doesn't look so cluttered and crammed. But that 2-page layout only works if you actually have a lot of experience to showcase. If you just got out of college, then you don't want to use a 2-page format. You want to stick it all on 1 page. A lot of employers actually feel a 2-page resume has a lot of useless info on it. They feel that you should be able to fit everything on 1 page. So again, this only works if you're going for a senior position and you actually do have a lot of relevant experience. And if you are shooting for a senior position and you've got the experience, a 2-page resume is probably going to be impressive and it'll give you an edge. If you just got out of college or high school and you're going for an entry-level position, focus on making your impact on 1 page. And unless you're a very high-ranking executive, your resume should never exceed those 2 pages. Otherwise, they're just going to think that you're an amateur and you don't know what you're doing. Number 10 is something new that I want to talk about. This is interactive or online resumes. This is relatively new and it is getting popular. And it's nice because with this you can showcase keywords. They can actually do searches through there and you can link to maybe more elaborate details somewhere else. You can even show them examples of something that you have done. So whereas with the regular resume you might show, I did, X, Y, Z, list that as an accomplishment. But with an online resume, you can perhaps actually, have the same text there, but make it a link. So it'll link to where they can see your accomplishment. Of course, that has some advantages. If you just got out of college, maybe you could put in there a link to a project that you completed while you were in school. So it gives a lot of flexibility. You can also use pictures. You can use charts, audio, even video of yourself. That's very popular. Be careful, though, and don't go overboard with this because it can never replace a hard copy of your resume. It only supplements it. It adds something to it. An interactive resume can be very powerful, but ask yourself some questions. How long is it going to take for them to download it? What's the target audience? How will they find me? So don't leave it up to your resume just because it's online. You're still going to have to do reconnaissance. You're still going to have to create a laser-targeted resume for a specific job opening. Ask yourself, is this really more beneficial than a hard copy, or is it just something that's neat to do? If you can provide real supplemental information and give them more than you're able to relate in the hard copy, that's great. But if it's just an online version of the hard copy, then you didn't really add any value. A good technique to practice is to create 1 page online, that's your resume. Okay, so you've got your online resume. And then create a separate page that is your portfolio, things that you want to showcase. When you send in your laser-targeted hard copy, list the URL of your portfolio so that they can skip right to that. They don't have to look at your resume over again, which is going to more than likely be a very generic and general resume. This is a mixed media approach. You're using the hard copy in conjunction with what is online. And it's still a very new approach, but there's a good chance that it's going to be very popular in the years to come. I think employers are going to embrace it even more. And our last topic, which is number 11, has to do with the way things look, and this also has to do with reader comprehension. The length of your bulleted items and blocks of text is very, very critical. If you use the techniques that we've talked about, you're going to end up with blocks of text and bullets, as opposed to very long paragraphs that run together. If you try to stuff too much stuff into those blocks, then you're going to defeat the whole purpose. The goal here is to break it down and make it easier to comprehend. So if you try to stuff too much information in there, you're actually making it harder. Okay, so it has to be in little bite-sized chunks. That's the whole purpose. The idea of all of this is that I know you've probably got a lot of information that you want to put in there. What you have to do is weed things out. Maybe your first draft is going to have absolutely everything that you want to put in there. But then what I want you to do is start to break things down and group it together and then determine what is the most important thing that you'd like to relate. Take out things that are not as important. Any single block should be 4 lines or less, 3 if possible. If a block is 5 lines or more, then there's a real good chance it's going to be skipped. And I mean the whole thing, because people will see first that it's a block, and then they will determine Is this too much information? Is this too hard for me to comprehend? And if it's got 5 lines or more, they're going to say there's too much in there for me to dig into right now, and they're going to skip on to something else. So try to stick with 3 if possible, but definitely 4 lines or less. And to make the whole thing aesthetically pleasing, perhaps you might list a previously held position. You describe your accomplishments, or you describe what the job was in 3 or 4 lines. Then after that, you'll have some bulleted points, some specific accomplishments. You want to make those 1 line less than your description. So, if your description was 4 lines, you want to have a maximum of 3 bullet points. If your description was 3 lines, then limit yourself to just 2 bullet points. We do this just because visually the layout is more appealing. Whenever we see just, 3 or 4 lines of a description and then we see like 15 bullet points, that's a little bit intimidating. So we want to show them that the bullet points are a little bit smaller than the job description. And avoid using just 1 bullet point all by itself, because that just looks a little bit awkward. Now in this chapter, I know we have covered a lot of ground. These 11 points are going to help you to get your resume past the initial screening. It's a lot of material, I know, but every single point is important. And this goes along with our next chapter, which is resume layout. Before we move on to that, though, let's review what our 11 points are. Start very, very strong. Shoot for a specific target. Avoid fancy extras. Keep things simple. Don't include out-of-date information. List first things first. Don't forget to use the correct nouns so that you speak the language. Review your resume, edit it, and submit it to somebody else to proofread. Choose the right type of resume, which we're going to go more than likely with the reverse chronological, and then 1 page or 2 depending on your experience and what kind of job you're shooting for. Consider using an interactive resume, and keep those bullets and blocks of text short.